Good morning. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Center here in Charlotte, North Carolina, home of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. I'm Lieutenant Kevin Petrus, and I serve in the Public Affairs Office here at CMPD. We are proud to announce today here at CMPD that we've made an arrest in a double homicide cold case occurred in 1984. I dare say that some in this room, if not many, those watching online were not even born at that point in history, 1984, almost 4 decades ago. But after a great deal of work and almost 4 decades, homicide detectives and cold case detectives were able to solve this case and bring us all one step closer to justice for the victims in this case. Captain Joel McNelly, it's McNelly, is the commander over the Violent Crimes Division, and that includes the homicide unit and the cold case unit here at CMPD. He is going to come now and share further about this case and the arrest. Captain.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lieutenant. So like Lieutenant Petrus said, we're here this morning to share that we've made an arrest in a particularly interesting cold case homicide from 1984. Before I get started, this morning as I was sitting down having coffee and reading some news, I ran across a editorial substack from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and in that it said that he broke Wilt Chamberlain's scoring record in April of 1984, and then as you all know, LeBron James just broke his record this week. Those dates coincide almost exactly with this case. And so what I thought was interesting is that, you know, that kind of big sports story never dies. Everybody remembers who that is. But I think society has probably forgotten about these folks. People don't remember that. It's been a long time. A lot of things have happened. But the family never forgot. And we never forgot. Over the years we've worked this case. And so I'm happy to share with you this morning how we got there. So a little background on March 14th of 1984. Charlotte police officers were called to a home on Ventura Way in the Hidden Valley neighborhood. The door was ajar and there was a foul smell coming from the home. When officers checked inside the home, they found 27-year-old Sarah Mobley Hall and her 10-year-old son, Derek Dion Mobley, both brutally murdered, assaulted, both of them strangled to death. A really horrific crime scene. Sarah was a single mother. During the day, she worked with special needs kids. One of those special needs kids was her son, Derek, 10-year-old Derek. Everyone described Derek as a very happy kid, really friendly to everyone that was around. But a few nights before they were found, someone came into their home and brutally murdered the two of them. Obviously, this launched a homicide investigation back in 1984. The original detectives did a tremendous amount of work, chased down possible suspects, people in the neighborhood. But ultimately, that case went cold back then. So to put the age of this in perspective, if there was a rookie police officer that started on the day of this crime, that person would be retired for more than 10 years now. But, you know, more importantly than that, there's been a family that's been waiting 39 years, wondering what happened to their sister, to their daughter. In fact, Sarah's parents have both since passed with no news of what happened to their daughter. Over the years, detectives would revisit this case periodically. At the time, we didn't have a cold case specific homicide unit, but our homicide detectives would be assigned this case. One of those detectives in 1998 was a young homicide detective named Johnny Jennings, who you may know as our current police chief. Chief Jennings, back then Investigator Jennings, had this case, and there was a burgeoning new field of forensic technology called DNA analysis. We all think that's a pretty regular thing now, but in 1998 it was a brand new thing. Then investigator Jennings looked through the case file and identified that there was what could potentially be some DNA evidence in this case. That evidence was submitted at that point to the CODIS database. The CODIS database is a national database that has DNA profiles of people who have been arrested for certain crimes. They're required to give a DNA sample. Those DNA samples go into that database, and then samples from perpetrators of crime or from evidence on crime scenes get compared against that CODIS information. Well, at the time, there was no hit. There's an automated process that over the years, those samples were reevaluated and reevaluated. And as we continue on, still no hits. Still no hits. Now we'll fast forward to today. As you know, CMPD now has a dedicated cold case unit, and I think you know from previous press conferences and conversations that we also have a cold case review team. That team is made up of retired federal agents, retired homicide detectives, attorneys, and academics that are in this field. And what those folks do is they take a full, complete case file, they go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and they say, is there anything now? Is there anything different now, whether that's technology or anything else that we could employ now that might help us solve that cold case? And so this case was reviewed a few years back. Well, recently, we figured out that there was some new technology that could be used to do this. So thanks to some funding from the Bureau of Justice Administration, and our SACI grant that we have with them, we were able to send some of that DNA off to a company called Innovative Labs for forensic genetic genealogy testing. To familiarize you with that, if you think about the case like of the Golden State Killer, this is where DNA collected on a scene is compared against DNA samples that are out in some public databases. And there's been lots of notorious cases around the country where we've gotten results from that. So as this, we'll call it FGG, Forensic Genetic Genealogy, as this FGG work was going on, we also had the opportunity to submit a sample to the North Carolina State Lab for something new in North Carolina called familial DNA testing. There are other states that have been doing this for a few years, but this is new in North Carolina. And what this does is fairly similar to FGG, but instead of comparing those samples against public databases, we're now comparing those samples against the government CODIS database that I told you where samples are collected over time. And instead of saying, does our sample match a particular person, now we're saying, does our sample have a consistent biology with anybody in there that could be in that person's family line? And so we submitted that, and for the first time in North Carolina history, this case got a hit to a DNA relative. The first time that's happened on a murder, I should say, to a DNA relative in this case. So CMPD's crime lab submitted that sample to the state lab, and we got back a match to a DNA relative. And that's where this investigation really started to take off with our detectives, doing the kind of genealogy research of who are these relatives that the state has identified and who could this person be. And with the help of our detectives and support staff, we pretty quickly narrowed down a person of interest in this. That person was now in South Carolina. And with the help of the FBI, we were able to get a sample, a DNA sample from that person. Our crime lab worked over the weekend to process that. And the great news is that we had a direct match to DNA that was found on the scene of this horrific murder in 1984. And that match was to a guy named James Thomas Pratt, P-R-A-T-T. We very quickly signed arrest warrants on Mr. Pratt, and on February 1st, Mr. Pratt was very quickly arrested with the assistance of CMPD's Violent Criminal Apprehension Team, the York County Sheriff's Office, and the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. Our detectives quickly scrambled down to York, South Carolina, York County, and were able to speak with Mr. Pratt, and Mr. Pratt has been cooperative with this investigation. We charged James Pratt with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Pratt was transferred to the custody of the Mecklenburg County Jail last week, and he's currently in custody with no bond. The family of Sarah and Derek have been notified of this. Siblings, I told you the parents had passed away. Sarah's parents have passed away. But Sarah's siblings were notified, as well as Derek's father. And they are absolutely elated. You can imagine sitting for 4 decades not knowing what happened to your sister, not knowing what happened to your son or your nephew. And to have this resolution is really, really important for this family. So I'm here today to tell you guys about this amazing arrest, about the amazing technology and the amazing teamwork that was used to do all this. It could not have happened with all the characters that I've listed through time. It's kind of a chain that goes back to 1984, and if any of those links are missing, we don't have the result that we have now. And so to kind of wrap up, going back to Kareem and LeBron, 39 years later, a new record was set. And the world is proud. Kareem is proud of LeBron. And I can tell you that the people that we've talked to, people that worked on this case back then, in fact, the lead detective has passed away, but one of the crime scene officers that worked on this, they brought news to him of this, and he said, please tell me this is about that case of that lady and her son. It's something that had bothered him for 4 decades since he worked that brutal crime scene. And so while a lot of the world may have forgotten about Sarah and Derek, the family certainly never did, and we certainly never did. And so we're really happy to be able to announce the arrest of James Pratt today. I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
What was his age and his relation to the victims?
So James Pratt, date of birth is 4/14 of 1962. So that would have made him 22 years old at the time. Sarah Mobley Hall, date of birth 5/1 of 56. She was 26 years old at the time. I'm sorry, 27 years old at the time. And Derek Dion Mobley, the 10-year-old, date of birth 9/2 of 1973. And so there was a friendly relationship between Sarah and James. Part of that's sort of part of our ongoing investigation. I've told you a lot of things, and we released a lot of things in 1984 that we probably wouldn't say these days about the case. So I've given you a little more detail probably than we would give you on a brand new homicide. But it's really important to us always for the integrity of an investigation that we're not prejudicing potential future jurors in a case, and so I will hold back some of those details about the exact nature of relationships, but there was a relationship, yes.
You said that the FBI helped match what the genealogy testing did with the man down in South Carolina with Mr. Pratt. How did that come about? We've seen them stop by and search their trash, etc.
Yeah, so we don't comment on exact methods that we use to do those kind of things. And again, that's part of the investigative integrity in this. But the FBI was successful in helping us obtain a sample from James Pratt. And then we tested that sample. Yes.
Can you speak to a motive on why he may have done this?
We don't exactly know that. We kind of know what was happening around the time and kind of what that relationship was, but the motive is still unclear. Back in the early days of this investigation, there was some suspicions about it being sexually motivated or drug motivated. We've been able to, we think, clear a little bit of that up and hone it down, but we really don't have a specific motivation.
Were there any signs of abuse?
So in the crime scene, Sarah specifically was brutally beaten. I can't speak to any abuse before that. I can say that I don't think this is a ongoing domestic type crime, but Sarah especially was brutally beaten, and then both Sarah and Derek were both, just really brutally strangled to death. Yeah.
And going back to that genealogy test, when did you guys do that? Because I know you said everything moved pretty fast afterwards. So
Yeah,
when was that?
that's all just been this year.
Okay.
That's all just been this year. Once we got this information, once we got I think this was just about 2 or 3 weeks ago when we got the sample from James. Like I said, one of our analysts in our crime lab literally stayed over the weekend and did the work to get that match. And the second we had that match, we dropped warrants on James Pratt, and as quickly as possible the very next morning had him under arrest.
James Pratt didn't voluntarily give a DNA sample, did he?
I'm not going to comment on exactly how it was obtained, but we did obtain a DNA sample from him.
He had any previous history with crime?
Does he have a previous history? So James Pratt has some kind of, I guess what we'd call now minor misdemeanor arrests back in the 80s and early 90s. Nothing that is consistent with this kind of crime at all.
Did he live here at the time of the crime?
He did. He lived in the neighborhood. Yeah.
Was he one of the main suspects when you guys originally looked at this case in 1984?
He was not. No, he was not. This was new information to
Was
us.
he considered at all at that point?
No, he was not. Nope.
What does this do for your cold case detectives now? I mean, does this open a new book on how to solve so many of them?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what's really cool. This press conference this morning just happened to coincide with our cold case review team, those retired folks. They're upstairs right now meeting, and they're going over another case as we speak, and this just happened to coincide with that. And so we were able to bring them that news this morning when the meeting started, and they're absolutely elated. And the detectives, as a detective, there are interesting cases, and then there are really fascinating cases. And this is a really fascinating case, and our detectives who worked on it, they're really, really dedicated folks who do a great job. And this is the kind of thing when you see a mother and a son so brutally murdered, and you see the pictures that you're seeing here of these folks, and the smiles on their faces and the relationship that they had, it energizes them. Absolutely, it energizes them. It makes them, excited to continue to do this kind of work. This field of forensic genetic genealogy and familial DNA testing. We're just on the front end of all this. It's only going to get better, and I can say there's a lot of bad people that have done a lot of bad things that are probably a little concerned right now because they may say, "Oh, cool, I never got arrested, and my DNA's not in the system." Yeah, well, maybe your nephew's is, maybe somebody else is, and we're going to use all of that to our advantages, within the confines of the law, and whatever we can do to bring justice for a family like this.
You talked about that grant and everything that allowed the department to use this method. Do you plan to continue using this method? How will that go?
Yeah, absolutely. We plan to continue this method, especially the forensic genetic genealogy right now. We are using that quite a bit, especially on cold case sexual assaults, but also on cold case murders. And so having that grant funding, it's expensive work. It's expensive work to have labs and genealogists do. And so to have that federal funding from the BJA to be able to do more of this work, that's exciting for us.
And what was that phone call like with the family? I know you spoke a little bit about the reaction, but what was that like when you called Sarah and Derek's family, you know,
Yeah.
I know her parents are of course gone, but.
Yeah, so the detectives that worked on this case, they're the ones that that got to make those some phone calls and some face-to-face meetings, and I could probably best characterize it as the families just breathed a deep sigh of relief. You know, something like that, just being on your back this many years is tough. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just a few weeks shy of 40 years. And so not only are they elated that this happened, but they can finally put a really, really long chapter of their life to rest.
What was James Pratt's demeanor when you guys went to get him? Was it like he was expecting you, or was he?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be a good way to characterize it. He was fully cooperative. Didn't give us any kind of trouble at all. And so yeah, he's across the street. Another little interesting fact is now Chief Jennings worked on it. His partner at the time was then investigator McFadden. So now two of the detectives that worked on this, one's agency was able to bring the case to a conclusion, and the other's agency is housing the suspect in this case now.
What has been the chief's reaction to this, knowing he was on this case at some point?
Yeah, Chief is excited. He's sorry he couldn't be here this morning, but he's excited. This is something that he's carried with him. In fact, I think you're going to get a little media package from us along with this release. It has some interview video with the chief on it, some audio from Sarah's sister, you know, and some information from the lab. But the chief is excited. Yeah, we met the other morning and kind of fully briefed the case to him and some of the other executive staff. And I will tell you that group of executive staff who've been around here for a long time actually gave the detectives that worked on this a round of applause, and that's an unusual thing in a meeting like that.
I want to go the non-sworn officers in the cold case unit that are helping. I know we've heard you guys talk about that before, but it's unique, is it not? I mean, these are retired people from multiple different industries that give new eyes to these cases.
Yeah. So there are a few retired FBI agents. They've been retired for quite some time. But obviously had a world-class background in law enforcement and investigations. We have some academics. Actually, one of them used to do crime scene work, went into the academic field, and is now teaching students to do this kind of cold case work. We have a private attorney on that team that brings, a different perspective as an attorney, who would be able to relate to an attorney that might object to things or poke holes in a case. And so it's really great to have that team. They're motivated because they had a job with a purpose when they did it. I retire later this year, and all of a sudden that purpose gets, it's not your daily job anymore. And for them to be able to stay in the game and lend decades of expertise and a really critical eye to cases like this is very valuable. So our cold case detectives, instead of having to read through boxes and boxes of old cases, they get a consolidated report that these retired folks and volunteers boil everything down and help them identify things so they can get out on the street and get straight to work instead of spending days and weeks reading through those details. So I can't say enough about the volunteer work that our cold case homicide review team does. Really, really awesome people, and we appreciate them.
How many siblings does Sarah have?
I do not know the answer to that off the top of my head. I know it is 2 or more. I can tell you that, but that's something we could get out to you.
And Derek was her only child, correct?
That I know of, yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Captain McNally, thank you. I know, standing off to the side, during Captain McNally's presentation, I could see the faces in the room, and it was a different look today. There's a look of excitement on faces. I would venture a guess that those that are watching online probably have the same type of countenance on their face, because this is it's a horrible incident, but it's a fascinating turnaround, and it's fascinating, the technology, the advancements, and then the work of the detectives. We're proud. We're proud. As Captain McNally mentioned, we are going to put out a media release. It's going to have many of the details that we talked about today in here, and it's also going to have the video package that Captain McNally mentioned, comments from the family, comments from Chief Jennings, and others. So we hope you enjoy that. Hope you'll take a look at it. Thanks.
Do you have the address of that, of the house? Is it in the package?
It's in the package, I believe. It's Ventura Way up in off of near the Hidden Valley neighborhood.